Hi there, my name is Tye Dandridge-Evancio. I'm a curator at Wazegaman Community Arts, and this is another video in our winter programming series. Today is a little different. We don't have any special guests being brought in because guess what? I'm the special guest. I'm going to be teaching you all about pochoir, or in other words, stenciling today, and we're going to make a very simple avocado design. So stick around and do a little bit of crafting with me. So today we're going to be getting into the art of pochoir. Now, for those of you that don't know, pochoir is the French word for stencil. So as the name suggests, we're going to be painting inside a pre-cut out stencil, and we're going to build up shapes and colors to create a full image. Now, what you're going to need for this assignment are just a couple things. First, you'll need a pochoir brush, which is a flat-tipped brush. You can find these at Michael's. I have a large one, and I've also got a smaller one. I suggest you start with a smaller one just to get a better handle on brush control. It's a little bit easier on your hand when you're working on smaller designs like the one we're doing today. You will need a pencil, slow drying acrylic paint, an X-Acto blade, a permanent marker, a fine tipped black pen, a cutting board, tape, green painter's tape preferably. That's because this is going to be a lot easier on your paper, and we're going to be applying it directly to the paper, and when you apply just regular masking tape to the paper, it tends to tear the surface, which is not what we want. So use the painter's tape, it peels off a lot easier. A few sheets of multimedia paper, some printer paper to use as scrap paper, and transparent acetate for cutting your stencils out. So once you've got all of your materials, we are totally ready to begin. So today we're going to be working on just something nice and simple to get you started with pochoir. So I picked an avocado. I'm a millennial. Millennials like avocados. Yeah. But in all seriousness, an avocado is something really easy just to give you the sense of how to build up with layers and how just a few simple shapes can create an image when you layer them on top of one another. So what we're going to do first is design yourself a rough draft of what image you're going to be making to work off of. I made this sketch of an avocado. And the great thing about what this does is it tells you what you're going to be working on and how many shapes you're going to need. So from this plan here, we know that what I need is 1 circle shape, 2 this inner kind of pear shape, which is going to be lighter green, 3 this outer pear shape, which is going to be a little bit darker green, and then this dark shape on the outside, which is going to be the outline, and that's going to be a super dark green, almost black. Make sure you don't skip this step. I used to do a lot of just winging it when I first was starting out with pochoir. Doing it this way saves you a lot of grief and heartache, because by doing this, you are saving yourself a lot of time creating shapes that don't fit on top of one another, etc., etc. So give yourself a planned outline, and once you've done that, we're going to move forward. So now that we've got our basic image here, we're going to start creating the shapes on the acetate. So you'll probably have some larger pieces of acetate. So what you want to do is just make sure you cut them down so they're a little bit more manageable. I just cut them into 4/4, and that works well for me. So you just want to put this over the image, grab your marker. Any marker will do. I have a felt-tipped pen for this, but it really doesn't matter. Whatever works. It should be permanent so it doesn't smudge. I'm going to do the outer shape here. Fairly straightforward. You just go as close to the edge of the line that you created as you can. And there you go. You don't need to be too detailed. All you want to do is just make that nice shape so that you know what you're going to be cutting when you move on to the next step. I just do the inside shape. The more precise you want to go with your image, the slower you'll want to take it. But some of the mistakes you make here, you can clean up when you cut out the shape. So don't worry too much if you make a couple smudges here and there. So now I'm just going to go ahead and do the rest, and then I will meet you at the next stage, which is cutting out your stencils. So now that you have all of your shapes drawn out on your acetate page, you're going to grab your cutting board like I have here, and then you're going to also grab your X-Acto blade. I suggest you get a nice thin one like this, not one of the bulkier ones. And the reason for that is when you're doing precise lining like this, you want something that's a little bit easier to use. I would also suggest that if you don't feel comfortable with a sharp object, you have a parent or guardian on standby, or you ask someone to do it for you. You don't want to risk cutting yourself over this. Now that we've got this cut out, we're just gonna cut along the line. I'm cutting along the outer portion of the shape I just created. You can be as precise or loose as you want when you're doing this. It really just comes down to how much time you want to spend on this and how clean you want the image to be. If you're a person who likes clean, smooth lines, then you're gonna wanna take some time on this. Another thing I will caution you on is just to make sure your X-Acto blade is nice and sharp. You won't necessarily notice a difference right away if you're using a dull blade, but the moment you switch to something that's sharper, it's going to cut through the page a lot easier, and that just means it's going to be a lot easier to get some nice, clean, smooth lines. So there we go. I think I went off camera when I did that, so I'll just do the second one for you. Oh, and you'll have this guy too. You're going to want to hold on to this too, because we'll be using this later as well. So we'll just do this once more. Going off. You'll find that your stencil will kind of move around as you're cutting it. I'm kind of gradually making my way out of camera. That's fine. All you need to do is just move yourself back onto the cutting board. And there you go. Make sure you're keeping this guy as well as this guy. Go ahead and do that for the rest of your shapes. There should be 4. And once you're done that, we're gonna come back and start stenciling onto your paper. Okay, so now that we've got our paper here, before we get into anything, this is where the tape comes into play. And what you're gonna do is you're just going to make a nice border on the outer edges. And this is so that this sticks the paper down to your working surface so it doesn't move around and make things difficult for you while you're trying to work. And it also creates a nice border depending on how you choose to fill the page. Like if you were to fill this up with a nice color, then anything covered with the tape obviously would be white. And I just find a border makes everything look better. But don't take my word for it. You'll see it at the end of the video when we're done. But absolutely do make sure you tape your paper down, because we're going to be dabbing pretty hard with the brush, and sometimes that tends to jostle the paper around a little bit. Again, this is one of those things where it's up to you. You can be as precise as you want to be. I'm kind of eyeballing it, but if you want to measure precisely and then stick your tape down, that is fine too. Usually if I'm working on a bit more of a complex piece, I do go in and just measure, you know, half an inch or an inch around and then put the tape down just so it's a nice clean border. But for this purpose, I'm being a little bit more loosey-goosey, a little more fresh, a little more frolicky, a little more spontaneous, that sort of thing. So now we've got your paper taped down, we are ready to get started with the pochoiring. So the colors I'm using for this particular project are as such: brown for the core, a light green for the innermost layer of the avocado, a dark green for the second layer, and a super dark green, almost black, for the outer layer. I'm also going to be doing a background. You don't have to do a background, but I like a nice colored background, so I'm going to be using yellow. So once you've got your colors picked out, grab your first stencil and just try to center it on the page. Now that looks good. Now I'm using multiple brushes, but if you only have one brush, that's fine too. Just make sure you're washing your brush in between the colors you use so that obviously the colors aren't getting muddied up. It just looks much nicer and cleaner. With your first brush, just load up on some of the color. Now you don't want too much, and I'll show you why in a second. On your scrap paper, you want to just dab all the excess off. Now this is actually a really good time to also show you the technique for how to use your brush when you're doing the stencil. Your first instinct will be just to kind of dab or to splash it on or swipe it on like that. Both are okay, but what I found to be a really good technique is kind of something in the middle. So you are dabbing very lightly, but you're gonna just twist when you hit the page. So twist, twist, twist. And what that does is it puts down a light layer of color, and by twisting it, it also blurs the texture left behind by your brush. So ideally what you're getting is just a smooth layer of color. So don't rush this step. You don't want to get too much off, but you want to just get the excess. And the reason for that is because when we're working with the stencils, it's obviously just a very thin piece of plastic. The thinner the paint that you add on, or the lighter hand you use, the easier it will be to keep everything clean and within the lines. The more messy it is, or the more paint that you use, the more sloppy the overall image is going to look. As well, it'll leave a texture of the dried paint on the page, whereas going on very lightly will leave just a nice flat surface. Again, both are valid. I just find less is always more. You can always build on a lighter layer of color, especially if you make mistakes or if you think that the color could be darkened or shaded a little bit. But if you just go in with a heavy amount of paint like that, you're not going to get anything darker than that unless you go back in with a darker color of paint, which is also a valid approach as well. But working this way gives you some options to create dimension with just the one color. So now that we've got most of the excess taken off, we're going to get this out of the way. And just holding it in place, we're going to start dabbing. I'm going to start along the outer edge. And just don't feel the need to rush this, especially if you're working with a thin amount of paint like I am. It'll take longer to build up the color and fill in the shape, but I promise you working this way is going to be a lot more satisfying once you see the final product than if you just glob it on. I find this is a really good project for watching TV or for listening to music. You can kind of zone out and kind of be in your thoughts while you're working on this. It's very therapeutic. And you'll notice as you're doing this, sometimes, especially on some of the smaller brushes, the hairs of your brush will fall out. That's normal. You just gently wipe them away. So once you're happy with your application, you can remove your stencil, and look at that. We've got our first shape on. So now we're ready for the next layer. I'm going to be doing the core, and it's just the same process. Get your palette, get a brush, load up a decent amount of paint, just dab off the excess. Now you can be a little more heavy-handed with this particular layer because you are going over top of something. And again, if you're not happy with how much paint is on your brush or you feel like it's too thin, you can always just add a little bit more to your brush. Now look at that, you've got the inner layer and you've got the core. So now that that's started, we're ready for a slightly trickier bit. We're going to do the outer green layer. Now if you look at that, we've obviously got a bit of a problem here. If I just go on willy-nilly with the brush, I'm going to cover up all that work we just did. Well, this is where these shapes that you kept will come in. You just put the corresponding shape over top like that. Now there's a couple options of what you can do here. I know someone who suggested a piece of thread and just tape it to the center and then tape it over here and it just holds it in place. Sometimes I've actually just put tape directly onto the paint, although that does risk taking the paint off underneath. I'm just going to use my finger to hold this in place. And make sure you're holding both of these so it doesn't move while you're stenciling on. Now, when you do this, you're going to have protection for all the work that you just did, and I'll just put color on the areas that aren't covered by plastic. And if you find your fingers are in the way, you can just pause a second and readjust. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly exact, but you'll notice here, there's just a couple white lines, and that's totally okay. You can just put the shape back down, just scooch it over, and just nicely... And there you go, that's your next layer. And now it's the same thing for the dark outer layer. You just put your stencil down. grab the inner stencil for the layer that you just put color down on. And it's just the same thing. Just make sure you hold this in place. There you go, look at that. So we could obviously stop right here because this is the final avocado. Isn't that pretty? But I want to go just a little bit extra, so I'm going to give this a background. So what I did is cut out one more shape that's bigger than everything. For me, I want to have a nice border around the avocado as well. So I cut it maybe about an inch larger than the avocado itself and just place it nicely in the center like that. Now for this step, you'll definitely want to have a larger brush. If you have a smaller brush, you can still do a background like this. Just keep in mind that working on an area of this size, it's going to take you a little bit longer. So just make sure you got the patience. Oh. That's one thing about doing this is you're going to be pounding the table with your brush, so if there's anything that you're afraid to break or go flying off the surface, maybe move it before you start doing this, because this isn't going to help. And look at that! We've got a nice white outline and a background for our avocado. Now again, I could stop there, but there's more. I'm crazy, I can't be stopped. This is a lovely image, and if you wanted to stop here, that's totally fine too. I actually think this is really quite pretty, nice and clean. But I'm just gonna take it a step further, because I saw this online and I thought it was adorable, so I'm gonna give this guy a little face. And this part, you really can just freehand it and choose to do it however you want. I'm going to lay it straight and give my avocado cutie some eyes up there. Just make sure you wait till the paint dries as well before you do this, because it'll make things a lot easier. Give them some eyebrows, but a little mouth. I'm maybe just gonna give them some hands too. So those are his little handsies. And maybe I'll just give him a little blush. Yeah, he's just happy to see you. And there you go. Now let's take off the border. Very slowly, because you don't want to tear the paper. Notice I said slowly and then I'm not doing it slowly, but here's the thing. Don't do what I do. Do what I say. I know the rules, so I'm allowed to break them. All right. And there we go, our finished little avocado person. You can do this with multiple different shapes or different fruits or different colors. This is just one of the different design ideas for you to choose from. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this project, please leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know if you want to see more Pochoir, and I can maybe do some different designs. I'm showing you how to make different animals, different fruits, all that. If you want to get in contact with us, contact us at Wazegamin Community Arts on Facebook and Instagram, and on Gmail, it's wazegaminCommunityArts@gmail.com. Once again, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, and that's all for me. Bye for now.